Right in the middle of negotiations as we speak.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Alrighty, so let's regroup a little bit and inform you as to what's going on with this latest State House controversy with the Speaker of the House and the Senate President at odds as we speak and as we record this program early in the day. Don't tell anybody, but we're not live. Of course, you see this at 7:30 on MyRI TV and Fox Providence at midnight. Sometimes things happen from the time that we record the show and the time you see it. That might happen today because it's a very fluid situation between Speaker Mattiello and the Senate President. Speaker Mattiello is here. We'll introduce him in just a moment. Let me remind you about some of the sentiment that's been going on here. Governor Raimondo yesterday doing her I wish they would routine.
I'm urging them as strongly as I can to do the right thing, put aside their differences, don't worry about whose fault it was in the first place, put the people first, and pass the budget.
All right, so you get headlines like this as the ongoing controversy continues. Ruggerio, Mattiello hopeful after their sit-down. Kim Kalunian caught up with the Speaker last night.
We, in the beginning, needed time.
After 18 days of a budget stalemate, movement. We've learned House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello and Senate President Dominick Ruggerio met for an hour Tuesday to discuss the next steps for resolving an impasse over the state budget.
Today's conversation was professional, friendly, productive, and I believe we're moving in the right direction.
The standoff began June 30th when Mattiello called a surprise recess.
And I am going to send you all home.
Leaving a version of the budget amended and passed by the Senate in limbo.
They left. They're gone.
In a statement, Ruggerio said Tuesday, quote, "The Speaker and I began discussions tonight that will continue over the next several days. My goal and hope is that we reach a conclusion that benefits all Rhode Islanders in the near future." He declined an on-camera interview on Tuesday. Mattiello wouldn't say where the pair met, only saying that they discussed the budget over beverages.
I had coffee, the Senate President had juice.
And despite their differing tastes and differing opinions, Mattiello says he's confident he and Ruggerio will come to an agreement.
We're working to get on the same page.
All right, welcome, Mr. Speaker. Great to have you.
Great to be here, Dan.
Decaf?
Regular. I wish caffeine would keep me up. It does not.
This has been quite the saga, and as we speak, you're most likely still going to have another conversation with the Senate President this afternoon, meaning before our broadcast is airing, but after we produce this broadcast, correct?
Yes, that is correct. We're scheduled to talk this afternoon.
The Providence Journal has a story about the Senate President's reaction to yesterday's developments and the plans he has today. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but I think it's kind of important before we get to the solutions, and that's the most important thing here, right, is to talk a little bit about how this happened and the play-by-play of how this happened. I think the most telling piece of audio and video that we just saw is the one where the Senate President says they just left. Based on my best ability to try to figure out what happened here, tell me if I'm correct when I suggest to my radio listeners and the TV viewers that what happened is that there was some turbulence in the Senate, some discord over things that have nothing to do really with the car tax and the budget itself, but some bills, the sick day pay, which didn't come out exactly like the Senate, some other legislation that may not have been, you know, palatable to some of the Senate leadership and key members of the Senate, and they kind of roughed up the Senate President a little bit on that. And one way that I think perhaps he was trying to get your attention to revisit that under pressure from them was to tag the budget with this amendment on the car tax language, which called for a rainy day fund stoppage, which of course you and I both agree is kind of a red herring, because if you had a budget problem as you're winding down the car tax, you'd have to stop it, correct?
Absolutely.
You'd have to stop
we
it.
appropriate every year.
Right. So it seems to me that what happened is that the Senate President planned to kind of tag this thing late in the session. You kept your word for the most part to the minute for these 9 o'clock exits and not these midnight sessions. I think he was planning on kind of tagging this thing later in the evening on the last day of the session, planned on that Friday, a couple Fridays ago. But you learned about it, a little birdie kind of got to you, and you learned about it early in the afternoon, and that's when you said, you know, we're going to be out of here. You called a press conference, and you let everybody go. left the Senate President kind of holding the bag. Is that an accurate play-by-play of this fateful day?
Well, yes, that's reasonable speculation. I still don't know exactly what happened. I came into the building.
You didn't ask him yesterday when you guys got together? You know, what the hell happened?
We discussed a lot of issue. Everyone has their unique perspective, so I don't know 100% what happened, but at the end of the day, we learned that there was going to be a budget amendment, and just so everyone...
Well, actually in the middle of the day, as opposed to the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what his plan was to tag it at the end of the night.
Right. And, you know, I was concerned for multiple reasons. Number one, I wasn't going to be there beyond 10 o'clock. That was my commitment to the public, and we're holding to that. We're going to hold to that into the future. The House, under my leadership, will not conduct business after 10 p.m. and we'll just come back the next day. So I didn't want to be there after 10 o'clock, and I didn't want to have to bring the House back in July. So the only way to avoid doing that was to close the desk, and that's why we went home. I wanted to leave the budget in the Senate. If they were amending it at the last minute, I wanted to leave the budget in the Senate where it is right now. So, but the good news is that the Senate and President and myself had very productive conversations yesterday early evening, and we're moving in the right direction.
We'll get to that in the progress in a second, but tell me why, and tell my viewers why it was so important for you not to play footsie with this budget at the very last minute.
Well, the process is very important to me. It's very important to the House, my leadership team. If you allow the budget, which is the central document organizing society, if you allow that document to be leveraged for other things, it's just a bad, dangerous precedent.
But the Senate President, and by the way, Senate President has been here, and I hope he comes back for his own version of this, to suggest that the budget was leveraged for other things. I think that's true. I know that's what you think is true. The Senate President won't admit publicly that that's true, and that's the sticky wicket. That's the problem that he has right now. He is trying to sell the idea that the tag on the budget, the amendment, on rainy day fund, fiscal, blah, 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 you know, discipline, was in and of itself the motive and the objective. You don't believe that, I don't believe that, and he's got to come and try to explain whether that, you know, how he can make that story credible.
Well, you're going to have that conversation with him. What I will say is I do believe some senators in the Senate probably did have that concern, and they brought it to the Senate President. You know, from his perspective, from some of his members' perspectives, I think that was a genuine concern. My concern was this is the 11th and a half hour. We're not gonna start talking about this and amending a budget that's been agreed to at this time. We're not gonna be in session beyond 10 o'clock. And if the Senate takes any action that's gonna keep us there beyond 10 o'clock, you can keep the budget and you can come back in July.
But
having said that, and I've got to continue to say that a lot of bad decisions, I mean, for the state not to have a budget, the wrong things happened. Things didn't go the way they should have gone. But we're in a direction of fixing those things, and we're coming together, and we're collaborative, and I commend the Senate President. So the good news right now is that I can commend him. He's showing great leadership skills under a difficult situation, and he's, I believe, going to bring his membership back and vote the budget the way we agreed that it would be voted.
All right, this is a different disposition than you had a week and a half ago when you were on the radio program with me.
We're in a different position.
Well, I understand that. You were mad as a hatter, and you were more or less. I mean, you weren't.
I was.
But you're angry. You were.
I
angry.
was.
And you know, hey, listen, I'll get on my bike for the summer, and I'll see you in the fall, or maybe I'll see you in January. There's a lot of political pressure, I think, for resolve, and I think a lot of people are saying they don't care who did what to whom, just fix it. So you reaching across and picking up the horn and getting together with him, I think probably showed the right kind of disposition and leadership. But you said something a few minutes ago that's key. You still don't buy the idea, although a few senators may have expressed qualms. Heck, I've expressed qualms with you about the car tax plan itself, which we can get into. But I think it is pretty obvious to all the political watchdogs and the players that this was a tactic that blew up. And so I think you're trying to be somewhat diplomatic about let's not rub his nose in it. Is that a fair thing to say?
You're going to have to assess it any way you want. What I will say is you are correct. Early on, I was frustrated. I was not happy with the direction that we were going in. And I made a lot of public comments regarding that. But listen, we all make mistakes. I've made more bad decisions than you and the Senate President combined. We all make mistakes in life, and we're heading in a collaborative direction right now, a good direction for the state, and I'm very pleased with that. And I commend the Senate President for showing the leadership skills. I have to recross bridges all of the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes that shows a lot of character when you in fact do that, when you should do that. So right now I had a very productive conversation with the Senate President. He showed me a lot of leadership qualities. He showed me that he cares a lot about the state. We had a lot of discussions about what's in the best interest of the citizens of the state, and that's the proper place to be when you're considering these things, because they do impact people's lives.
Well, it's hard to get out the specifics out of these guys when they're in the middle of conversations, and I think you can see the diplomatic tentativeness the speaker is engaging in. But the Senate President spoke to the Journal earlier today, and when we come back, we'll read that, ask the speaker to react to it. Stay with us. How to get this thing done?
I don't have any answers, and I look at that issue as the Speaker Mattiello issue. He came out with it during the election.
Do you agree with me that she kind of jumped them on this one?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think she might feel that she has a better idea as how to resolve that situation. So I'm not sure if it's her looking to one-up the Speaker, or if it's just her looking to help the issue. The car tax in both my areas, North Providence and Providence, is a huge issue. So I'm supportive of a reduction in the car tax. And how they get there is anyone's guess, but I hope somehow they get there.
That was a while back. We're back here with the Senate President, the other player in this State House drama. We were talking about the governor and her 30% car tax reduction plan that I thought she kind of piled on top of your initiative that you brought together all during that contentious and difficult District 15 race. The Senate President never really showed any kind of ownership of this car tax plan, which is why I am interested in this idea that he tagged an amendment at the very end on this rainy day thing. The moral of the story will come out here over the next couple of days, but it seems to me that under no circumstances were you going to revisit the budget. So I don't care how many coffees and juices you guys had yesterday or how many beers you have tonight. The truth of the matter is that you were not going to give on that period, correct?
That is correct. Once a budget is negotiated, it would be bad policy to revisit the budget. It would set a bad precedent for the future. So what we did is we had discussions on what's in the best interest of the state, and we both concurred as to what was in the best interest, and that enabled us to move forward.
So whatever evolves here is going to include, and actually begin with, the Senate lifting that amendment and passing the budget transmitted from the House to the Senate as is, correct?
I believe so. I believe that was the Senate President's comments to the Journal earlier today.
So Kathy Gregg of the Journal, I guess, caught the Senate President in the parking lot at the State House, and she writes an exclusive interview, because everything's exclusive around here. Ruggerio says, I've got to talk to my senators and see what their availability is, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. I want to sit down and talk with them first. I want to talk with my leadership team. I want to talk to Bill Connolly, Senate Finance Chairman. I'm going to look to do that today. I want to keep members informed. This all in response to the idea that he intends to just call the leadership team in, which very well may mean call the entire Senate back in immediately to pass this budget. They're not going to do that, though, Speaker, without something back. So what is it that we could prognosticate you will do for him as he has to eat some crow on his side?
We're not having any specific discussions about anything. I would not, did not, would not, will not negotiate anything for the budget. The budget has to be passed on what's in the best interest of the citizens of the state. And to the Senate President's credit, he agreed with that. And We both came at the problem from the same exact perspective,
you're
so
telling
we agreed on what the solution would be.
Oh, okay. So that's not included in the journal story. So what you're telling me is that it is your reporting out of at least your first meeting that the Senate President agrees that the budget has to be passed as is.
Well, we didn't quite get there. We have a little more information out of the journal story today.
He's going back to his leadership team to get that approved.
We had very productive discussions. So to be productive, and if you read into my comments that I will not renegotiate a budget that's been previously negotiated, it would mean the Senate coming back and reconsidering the budget.
It would not require the House to come back.
It would not, and the House is not going to come back. But I want to reiterate that we had productive conversations about what's in the best interest of Rhode Island and its citizens, and that's what brought us to the resolution of the situation. It wasn't a quid pro quo, and we didn't discuss anything for the budget. Like I said, I would not do that. It would set a bad precedent for the future, and not setting a bad precedent was my primary concern. Getting the budget passed, this budget passed for the citizens is also a significant concern. So we're both doing the right thing.
See if I understand this. You guys got together and you said, hey, Donnie, I'm not moving on the budget. So how can I help you fix this? Is that more or less what your disposition was? How can I help you fix this? Which means, while the House may not come back this week, next week, as the Senate may have to, you might do something in 2017 still to work on a couple of pieces of legislation that reportedly were dangling anyway?
Well, what's important to both of us is our working relationship, and we did talk about that, and we talked about the need to conduct the work of the people going forward.
Was that your disposition? Look, I am moving on the budget. You know that. You kind of stepped in it, and how can I help you get out of here?
No, I wouldn't say it was exactly that.
But I'm not that far off, am I?
We had very productive conversations about what's in the best interest of the citizens of Rhode Island. Honestly, very productive, and it was just regarding what's the best thing to do right now. How do we move forward? How do we serve our communities the best?
He didn't lean over and said, Nick, help me. I'm in
no,
trouble
he did not. He did not. He discussed issues.
That's not his style anyway. But we all know that his move was a miscalculation. That's it. So he's got to figure out a way to rewind that, and you got to find a way to look, like a leader. And I think you're probably, listen, I don't suck up a lot, but I think you're playing this finesse game pretty well. I mean, you made the call. You were I'm not changing the budget, but you made the call. You got together with him. You're more or less, it's kind of like the old, it seems to me, remember the old, what's the movie with, I'm so bad on this, help me help you? The agent, what's the agent? Remember the agent, sports agent?
Jerry Maguire.
Jerry Maguire. When he's like, help me help you. It's almost as if you were in that particular situation.
Not exactly. Collaborative outcome that best serves the citizens. That's the best way I can put it. And we discussed where our differences were. It was a very frank, very direct conversation from both our perspectives.
Why? Because he thinks he's got the right to do what he did in a way, that the Senate, being an equal partner in government, has the right to tag that budget if it wants to?
He did not say that, so I'm not going to characterize it like that, but we had very direct conversations. I indicated where I thought mistakes were made without getting into specifics. He did the same thing, and that's the basis from which you move forward.
Tell me, and I guess there might be some progress between, again, our taping and our airing. You think there's a resolve this week?
I hope so. I hope so. That would be in the best interest of the citizens. I really hope so. I believe we are quickly moving in that direction, and I want to commend the Senate President for showing leadership in getting us out of the stalemate that we were in and moving us forward.
There's other things going to happen in the fall anyway. The Senate's going to be conducting business on the Paul Sox hearing, so we'll talk about the Senate, rather the House's reaction to that action when we come back. Stay with us. All right. So there's so much going on that we don't have time for, but the Senate is going to come back in the fall for Paul Sox hearings. You have played rope-a-dope, more or less, on the whole Paul Sox thing. You haven't been an objector. You've just been an interested observer. If a palatable Paul Sox deal comes our way this fall, Will you act on it as well?
Well, right now, I am solely focused on the budget. After the budget passes, we can consider.
All right, well, about
we're
6
gonna
o'clock tonight, that deal's going to get done. So
we'll consider other legislation. I know that there's a lot of folks interested in the Paw Sox legislation. It's going to require a lot of work and a lot of hearings. So I haven't even pivoted to.
Well, the Senate wants to drive
that.
it. The Bill Connolly wants to drive it. They want to drive it. I'm sure. They don't want to be operating alone in the fall. So my guess is that somewhere along the line, you're gonna do some business in the fall on the House side, if only on a short period of time.
I
right?
believe that is correct. I would like to come back. We have a lot of important bills. We have the domestic violence bill. There are a lot of important bills. That's probably the most important bill in my estimation that we should come back and address and get passed for our citizens. So I plan on coming back. I just want the budget passed
Did you think
first.
that was going to get done on the last day, the domestic violence bill? But you pulled the cord, and you didn't get it. You didn't get it finished.
Had we stayed, I did anticipate that bill getting
and we
concluded.
could see some sick day pay adjustments back and forth, and a couple of other bills that were bouncing back and forth between the chambers could get massaged.
Oh, absolutely.
So the Paw Sox thing is interesting because right now, Worcester is starting to heat up, and there could be other communities that will heat up, and they have every right in the world to start shopping. Bill Connolly saying the other day they'd be crazy to do so, I think is the wrong way to approach this thing. Guess what? They'd be crazy not to be looking for a deal right now with the lethargy that has gone on here, mostly from the governor's office, and kind of dropping this ball since she was the custodian of the entire thing. Do you predict that by mid-fall, the state of Rhode Island will come to an agreement with the Paw Sox for new McCoy Stadium?
I have no prediction on the Paw Sox. I have given it very little thought as of right now. I'm willing to consider it, and we'll go wherever that takes us. I have no preconceived notions of what the outcome should be on the Paw Sox.
Which means you're not going to fight a reasonable deal. I mean, some of the structure, and the structure's already been kind of identified. You have a qualm with the structure, as it's been publicly discussed?
I don't have a qualm with the structure, but I also haven't studied the structure. In fairness to me, I have not given the structure of that deal a lot of in-depth consideration. We're far away from considering it. We'll take a look at it if it's in the state's interest to do so. What that looks
that's not a confidence booster for the Paw Sox management right now. Watching the show, thinking, is Mattiello checked out on this whole thing? Is he going to come to the table for us? I mean, I know careful is careful, but it sounds like you're being more nonchalant than might be responsible. All due respect.
Well, responsibility requires that we study it, and we'll study it, and we'll vet whatever the proposal is, and the details are going to be important, as has been reported in the press. So we'll see what the details are, and we'll move forward. And by the way, Dan, I have no idea what the public's perspective is on this, and that's of vital importance. Whenever you do something this big, the public has to be a partner, and the public's either going to want to work out some type of an agreement with the Paw Sox to keep them here or not.
Well, what are you going to do?
We have
What are you going to do? Polling? I mean, listen, somewhere along the line you got to make a decision.
Perhaps someone will poll, but you get a feeling of what the reaction is. You'll never have 100% consensus, but you get a feel for where the public is. And right now, I have no idea. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about it.
Well, so you got another meeting with the Senate President. I guess we'll see you back here on the set tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure to come on.
All right. Final word when we come back. For further developments on this on WPRO, weekdays 3 to 6, and right here tomorrow night. Good night.